You are listening to Digging In Podcast, presented by Rooted Wealth Advisors.
Welcome back to another episode of the Digging In Podcast. I'm your host, Kincho Kelly, helping you get those questions answered to and through retirement. Today, joined with me is Joe Mateja, father of two, brand new one at home.
Yeah.
Congrats, man.
Yeah, thanks. We're about 3 weeks in now. And, God bless my wife. She's taking the brunt of it.
She does the most.
She does do the most. I was telling you earlier, kind of joking around, I kind of feel bad sleeping. I don't know what I can do to help at this point.
Yeah. You got to do what you can. You got to do what you can.
I'm sure my wife is sick and tired of hearing me ask every 10 minutes, what do you need? How can I help? What do you need?
I mean, at least you have that heart and that availability, man.
I'm happy to. I want to.
And that's awesome.
There's just
That's
not a lot
awesome.
that I can do yet.
I know. But speaking of sleeping,
Yeah.
we got an election coming.
We
How
do.
many people are sleeping on this election?
How much time do we have?
Right? I know. It's wild. And we got clients from all over the place. And we have clients with every different political affiliation you could probably possibly imagine. But every 4 years, we get one of these fancy presidential elections. And
It's kind of a big deal.
kind of a big deal. I mean, basically, we're voting on the leader of the free world. But it's one of these things that I think people get very anxious when it comes to specifically how the election relates to the market and their retirement, right? I think there's this sense of like,
people get scared. People
Yeah.
get fearful. A lot of people choose to bury their head in the sand,
Right.
and
or go the other way.
and
watch everything and anything.
Yeah, you got the two extremes. I think that I've been getting this question a lot, more and more obviously as we get closer and closer. But here's what I'll tell you. Historically speaking, regardless of the person, regardless of the party, the fourth year of a first-term presidency is typically a really good year in the market. Typically.
Well, that's some good news, Joe.
It is good news. Now, the disclosure is, as we all know, past performance is not indicative of future results.
And you could have a job in compliance.
I could. I don't want one. But here's the truth of the matter, right? We have a first-term party. Doesn't even matter the person. What do they want? They want re-election. How do they get re-elected? Voters, right? How do they get voters on their side? Things better be doing pretty good.
Right.
And what's the biggest go-to is going to be the markets, right? Kind of an outlier this year are interest rates too, right? It looks more and more like we won't see any interest rate cuts at the beginning of the year, probably the first half of the year. And I think there's probably that's probably justified, economically speaking. But more and more, I'm convinced that it's also a political play, right? The closer to the election, the more desperate, each side is going to be for votes. Well, the sitting, administration has a couple of cards that they can play. One of those is going to be interest rates. So if we see interest rates come down second half of the year, which that's the consensus, we'll start to see some rate cuts second half of the year. The more that they can look at all of us Americans and say, hey, I did that.
We
Vote
did that
for me.
for you.
Yeah, we did that for you, Kinch. Only for you.
Well, if you clicked on the podcast because of some witty clickbaity title, that we came up with, I am sorry to disappoint you, because neither Joe nor I are here to talk politics explicitly. There are good and bad things to say about both sides of the aisle, but I think the majority of Americans land somewhere in the middle. And we are trying to look at it as objectively as we can from a wealth advisory firm standpoint, and trying to figure out what makes sense for our clients, our prospects, even ourselves, as far as the market's concerned, as far as interest rates and all this fun stuff. You talk about interest rates cuts and everything. We've seen some extreme volatility in that side, regardless of who's been in office.
Yeah.
But for the past couple years, I mean, even if you've gotten a mortgage on your home, you've seen rates triple-ish,
yeah.
Depending on where
close.
you were at to start, it
Yep.
would have been, because I know when we were looking in, it would have been October of 2021. It was down well below 3, and
Now they're hovering
it's
7s, 8s.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Kinch. Doesn't matter the side. I take a lot of pride in not, going down a political path with folks. But the fact is, politics has a pretty substantial effect potentially on our markets. And, one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle that we do for our clients is, invest their money in the markets.
And, and have some advice,
Right.
based on what we've seen.
Right. So we better have a stance on politics. Doesn't mean that we pick a side, but it does mean that we better have an idea on what is going to be best for our clients and their portfolios based on the political climate that we're living in.
Right. Because it's not like, I hate to draw this example, but your dentist probably doesn't have a lot of effect on politics, right? Like the administration doesn't have a lot of pull over dentist, but the political administration, no matter who's in party, does have strings to pull, specifically when it comes to finances and when they feel like they can, I don't know if manipulate's the right word, but it feels like the right word. So full disclosure, I don't know if this is the right word, but it feels like they kind of pull some strings to affect in twisted into a positive light that they're the ones doing it, when in reality you have to be a savvy consumer to be able to see through some things.
Yeah, and from a wealth management perspective, an advisory perspective, it is quite it's complicated, but it's simple in the same way. And what I mean by that, it is really just paying attention to the political climate, what's being said, what actions are likely to take place, and how that's going to affect the markets, and thusly positioning our portfolios in a way that can capture growth and minimize the downside, right?
Did you drop thusly on me?
I did. Zach is rubbing off. That's a Zachism for sure.
Thusly.
Yeah.
All right.
Side note, nothing compares to y'all.
You did drop that. You did drop that
yeah.
fairly recently.
Yeah, I did.
And you're not a Southern boy.
I'm not a Southern boy. I'm from Chicago. But anyways, so back on track.
So I guess let's boil it down to like the nitty gritty. People want to understand, is the election going to affect my retirement?
Yes. Sure.
Right. It's
That's
that
the
simple.
short answer.
Right. And I think people are going to be like, okay, more. Give me a longer answer. But yes, because...
because whoever ends up in... whatever administration ends up in office, they will lean towards policies one way or the other. And the administration that ends up, whether it's the left or the right, is likely to continue down a historical path. Now, again, history does tend to repeat itself, but is not indicative of future results. Paying attention to who ends up in office and understanding that there will be an effect on retirement. It might be good, it might be bad, but being prepared, right? Having a plan in place to weather a potential storm, or having a plan in place to take advantage and capture the upside, growth that is likely to come as well. That's something else. So, the fourth year leading up to an election of a first term is typically good. The months immediately following an election are also typically good. So I guess the message that I'm trying to give you, Kinch, is although we always have our thumb on the political climate, what's happening, there's some runway there, right? There's some runway for us to kind of figure out, okay, here are the election results. Here's what's likely to happen, and then we can start, making some predictions about the future.
It sounds like there's a window of opportunity to come see you.
I would say that is spot on. I could not have said that better myself. There is a window of opportunity, right? If you're worried about the election, come and visit. Let's take a peek and see, are we allocated appropriately? Are we in a position to maximize growth potential this year that is likely to come, but also weather any unforeseen, storms that might brew in the markets, right? You mentioned volatility earlier. Markets have been volatile, no doubt. They're positive overall this year, which is good though.
Well, and you mentioned allocations earlier, and that got me thinking. I had read an article in Barron's about people not understanding how their allocations work, right? Yeah. And I think it took, don't quote me on this, so I'm not going to cite any sources. Maybe I shouldn't have even said Barron's, but when the market was growing, the examples that they gave that grew were the more risky of items in that particular portfolio. And so after a decade of substantial growth, you think that you're still a middle of the road, not a big risk taker. But in reality, when you reassess the risk, now you've over doubled or tripled your risk because the things that grew were more risky. So it's that allocation, I think, that sometimes creeps up on people. Yeah,
you're describing kind of the set it and forget it, conundrum, right? We talked about, people saving for decades and decades, save, and then what do I do? And a lot of folks have taken I'm just going to let it go. I'm not looking at it. I'm just going to keep putting money in. The 60-second explanation I'll give you, Kinch, is, a lot of people are familiar with I'm a 60-40 person. Mm-hmm. 60% equities or stocks and 40% bonds or something a little more conservative. And that might be appropriate for you. And maybe that's appropriate for a while. But with the set it and forget it allocation approach, you start out 60-40. And then if a decade goes by and it's just a lot of substantial growth year over year, 60-40 turns into 65-35. Then it turns into 70-30. And then it turns into... And before you know it, right, all of a sudden we're taking unnecessary risk without even realizing that we've done that.
And it seems, to me at least, it feels like before an election, right, before everything's finalized, that would be a time that you would want to reassess that area.
Yeah, I would say, even outside of an election year, Kinch, you should be assessing or at least taking a peek at your portfolio and those allocations. Twice a year, I would say. Right. If we're within, maybe 2 or 3 years of retiring, maybe that's, 3 times a year. Not the time to be, letting things
go to chance.
Correct.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate your insight into the political climate, the election, all that stuff. My last question, what was it like voting for Lincoln?
Why? I'm not that old. I've no gray hair yet.
Okay.
I've got some here.
All right.
I've got some here.
Me too.
But it was amazing.
Yeah. Do you have, on a fun note, do you have a favorite president? Are you much of a history buff?
I'm not too much of a history buff. JFK.
Okay.
The layups are, Lincoln did so much good, right, for our country. You can't ignore GW. Mm-hmm. Right, mm-hmm. George Washington. That is.
Yeah, I know who you were talking about.
The OG, the original,
the OG.
I think in recent history here, though, We've had a pretty solid run, for the most part, of capable individuals, and a lot of good policies have passed. Some bad in there too, right? But I think that's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, that's kind of the party system, right? There's some give, there's some take. And just because a certain person's in office doesn't mean they're responsible for all the policies that come through either. And
Absolutely.
I think that gets overlooked a lot.
So much. I'm glad you said that. So much of what any president deals with are the ramifications and the consequences potentially of prior administrations.
I think we talk about that when we talk about the U.S. debt clock all the time.
Oh my
right?
goodness.
About how much spending has gone into certain things, and when you take office, a lot of times you're
You inherit that.
inheriting somebody else's mess, and so they're not all to praise, but they're not all to blame. I think at the same time.
I'm glad you brought that up. I want to leave you something. I know we're going to wrap up here, but I think it is. You just described administrations kicking the can down the road.
Mm-hmm.
The next administration will deal with it.
We'll deal with
the
it
next
later.
one will deal with it. Call it what you want. That's really what it is in essence. And I feel that there's a correlation to so many people and their own retirement, right? Which is what we do.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? I'll deal with it next year. Or, you know what? There's just so much. It's paralysis by analysis so far, or so often, right? With folks, right? They kick the can down the road. No better time to start planning than now. Yeah. Today.
I don't know that I could close it any better than that. So we'll just leave you with that. No better time to start planning than today.
Give us a call.
Give us a call. What's the number, Joe?
It is 815-918-4727.
That's right. And get a copy of our new Amazon best-selling book, Deep Roots. And of course, we'll get you time on Joe's calendar to talk all things politics because he loves it so much. Also, maybe talking about your unique financial situation. Until next time, keep digging in.
This was Digging In Podcast, presented by Rooted Wealth Advisors.